Hello, everyone. Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. As you can see, my friend Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads is back with me. We are getting together again to bring you more books from the best can-lit books of the 21st century. This project has been so much fun. First of all, welcome, Lindy. It's great to have you. The project started off kind of in response to the list that the New York Times put out of the best books of the 21st century. And Lindy and I were both like, why don't we do a Canadian version of that? And so we reached out to booktubers and authors and Instagrammers and basically anyone that we knew who loved can lit. And we had them choose up to 10 books that they would put on the best can lit books of the 21st century. And we received 352 submissions to that. And that list is so much fun. And so today we are bringing the 21, I think there's 21 short story collections to you that were submitted. Partly because it's September and a lot of people are choosing to participate in Shorty September. So this might be some inspiration around some books that you could choose. So, and I will leave links below to all of the videos that we've done in the past and that other people have done in response to that and their reactions and those kind of things. Okay, so we have 21 stories or 21 short story collections to share. So, Lindy, would you like to go first?
Sure. The the oldest book on the list is by Ivan Coyote. They are a non-binary storyteller from the Yukon, and they've got several collections of short stories. And the one that made the list is called Close to Spider-Man. I know we own a copy, a signed copy. It's somewhere in this house. And I found One Man's Trash and I found Loose End. Anyway, you can pop up a little graphic in here. This was Ivan Coyote's debut collection. I like all of their short stories. Uh, the first one, though, has the ones that I guess are closest to their growing up years. So, being a child, being a teen, in the Yukon, in Canada, northern Canada. Really funny stories, like the one that's called No Bikini, has to do with uh, being a child who's mistaken at the pool when during swimming lessons. So, right from the start of swimming lessons, their boyhood is what's seen. And so they go without bathing suit top. And it's not until towards the end of the lessons that their mother discovers what's been going on. Says you can't be trusted with a two-piece. Yeah, so stories like that about the scariness of changing your name, that sort of thing. Recognizing queerness in somebody else and, how that connection feels so good. All of Ivan Coyote's stories have so much warmth to them. Yeah, you just feel good reading them.
I have heard really good things about Ivan Coyote. I've never read anything by them, but I want to now because every time I do hear someone talk about their writing, I'm like, oh, that sounds like something I would enjoy. So one day, one day.
And the other thing is to watch for them doing live performances because
Oh,
for something like for more than a decade, they have been traveling across Canada and the US performing these pieces as, like spoken word, but there's
okay.
storytelling. Yeah.
Very nice. I will have to look that up. That sounds good. The next short story collection was published in 2001, and it's called Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, Marriage. by Alice Munro. And Alice Munro is like Canada's short story guru, I would say. She died earlier this year. And my guess for this collection, I have not read it. My guess is that the title of the collection kind of gives away the themes. So there's not really much, wondering there. But I think with Alice Munro, I've read some of her other collections, and I think maybe even especially with this collection, that each story, shows a slice of life. Kind of ordinary, regular, daily people kind of going about their business. But usually with Munro's writing, you feel that you know the characters, you're kind of placed in the story yourself. At least that's how I've always kind of experienced her writing. And her short stories to me are very well developed. Like she creates a world very quickly, that feels very real, and that you can, yeah, easily imagine kind of being in that world with these characters. So I don't know, and Lindy, maybe you've read this, so I don't know if every story is a different character or if there's some connections. But I know that, yeah, it just seems like there must be like a story about kind of each one of those titles, is my guess.
I don't remember there being connections between the stories, but they are all about women's lives. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Here's
also another thing she's very good at.
my cat Frida has made an appearance.
Frida wants to be part of the video.
So next up is a collection that I haven't read. It's Open by Lisa Moore that came out in 2002. Lisa Moore is a writer from Newfoundland and Labrador. She's also written quite a few novels. I've read three of those. So I do know what her style is like. Lisa Moore has this ability to capture emotions. So a lot of warmth, like Ivan Coyote, and the feeling like you know these people, you know these situations. Uh, yeah, this is one I feel like I've missed out on because this is a one that I haven't read of hers, and I definitely want to get to it. So I'm glad it's on this list.
It kind of like makes me want to read all of the ones that are on the list. It always happens. Lisa Moore, I have at least one, if not two. I know I have February on my shelf. I'm pretty sure that's her, right?
Yeah, it
February,
is.
yeah. And yeah, it's been on my shelf forever. I think about 20 people have told me I should read it. So yeah, so I really do want to read, some of her work and probably do some of her backlist as well, because she's very well known and I feel like I'm missing out on her. So yeah.
Yeah, the description of this collection is that fear of love, mistakes, and loss, and the joy to be found in these are in the stories. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Next up is a short story collection from Thomas King, who I think is a fantastic writer, and it's a short history of Indians in Canada. This was published in 2005. I actually just recently picked it up partly because it was on this list and I was able to get it for a really good deal. I think I only spent like a few dollars for it. So there's 20 stories in this collection. And Thomas King's writing, I've talked about him before. I know I say this all the time, but it's usually a mix of humor, but then it really packs a punch. Like there's usually a very powerful message that he's trying to convey that, you kind of laugh the whole way through. And then at the end, you're like, oh, that's what it's about. Like, oh, and it kind of hits you in the gut. Um, and I think that he does that exceptionally well in his writing and how he brings that together. But I thought I would share this blurb that's on kind of the front flap here. And it says, a flock of Indians has just flown smack into the side of a Bay Street skyscraper again. It's up to Bill and Rudy to tag the live ones, nurse them to health at the shelter, and release them back into the wild. So that has me intrigued. I'm like, okay, now I have to read this. This sounds very interesting. Have you had the opportunity to read this, Lindy?
Yes, and it's easy to mistake it from the title for nonfiction.
Oh, okay.
but this is fiction.
Yeah. I hope so from that blurb.
All right. So next up is another Indigenous author, Dawn Dumont, and her book Nobody Cries at Bingo. Dawn Dumont is Nahiawak from the Okanese First Nation in Saskatchewan. This is a pen name. Dawn Walker is her uh, non-writing name. What do you call that?
Her given
Both
name.
real.
Her given name.
Yeah. And this is a collection of stories that's very closely interlinked. They're about growing up on the Okanese First Nation, uh, lots of family stories, lots of relatives, lots of laughter, some tears, starting from childhood and then going all the way up to attending university to be a lawyer, which also is what Dawn Dumont did. Uh, I first read this because it was a book proposed for the Alberta Reader's Choice Award. It was published in 2011, and I was one of the people narrowing down the long list. I wasn't a juror for that, but uh, it was considered an adult novel. And it's interesting that newer editions of this have been promoted by the publisher as young adult or YA. And in fact, this at the Victoria Public Library, where I picked it up, it was in the teen section. And when I was still working in Edmonton, I noticed that new copies of this book, because they wear out because so many people like reading it. It's a great book. Anyway, the new copies were being filed in the teen section. So it's kind of interesting. I would say it's a crossover. So certainly appeals to teen readers, but also very much to adults. Yeah.
And the title kind of makes me think that it's humorous. Was it potentially?
Definitely. In some
Yeah.
places, laugh out loud funny. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, so
Yeah.
was it potentially like a Stephen Leacock Award? Was it, do you know if it was ever on a?
Okay, certainly.
Yeah,
Certainly.
I
Yeah.
could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one that I'm like, okay, I need to read that. I had never heard of it before. So that's another reason I love these lists, is because other people, who put books forward that I had never heard of. And I'm like, I need to check some of these out. So I appreciate it for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, up next is Alice Munro again. This is Dear Life. This was published in 2011. And I think Alice Munro is the only one who has two short story collections on the list. But as I know, there's somebody else. Okay. So Lindy
Wait
will
for
share
it.
that with us. Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned. Um, so again, she's the guru, as I said. So um, these stories I think are classic Alice Munro, and again that they're everyday life, regular people, um, probably focused on women, as you said before, because that is usually what she does. I think that's what she's done in all of them, at least all the ones that I've read. Um, and I think that this one kind of focuses on the moments in life where life is changed in really significant ways, either because a decision was made, an act, that somebody chose to do something or didn't choose to do something, and it kind of shifts the way their life goes forward. So that's my understanding, but I'm guessing that you have read this, Lindy.
Yes, I
So
have.
maybe you can say more about it.
When it came out, Alice Munro said this is the only book where she has drawn on her own experience growing up, that some of those stories are closely autofiction. But
Oh, okay.
that's one of the things I remember. So as I was reading it, I was like, is this one of the stories? Is this one of the stories?
What part of this is true? I always like that. I love when people like I always think it's good, even in fiction, to kind of have something, like even a little nugget of truth in it. So that's good to hear. So yeah, this is another one on my TBR for Alice Munro.
I also want to mention that even though there has been controversy surrounding Alice Munro because of her daughter's revelations about, what happened with her stepfather. Uh, uh, Andrea, is that her name? Yes.
I think so.
Yeah. So Andrea has, and her siblings are all saying they don't want people to stop reading their mother's work. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw either an interview or something where they said that, where they said, keep reading. We want you to keep reading her books. Yeah, that the stuff that came out wasn't to say don't read her
Mhm.
anymore or anything like that. So yeah, and I think Canadians have kind of embraced hopefully that idea. It's sometimes hard though, I know, for some people to, make that separation. Yeah,
Agreed.
yeah.
So next is yet another Indigenous author. I'm so glad that Leanne Betasamosake Simpson is on this list. It's for her collection called Islands of Decolonial Love, Stories and Songs. And it came out in 2013. So, as you can guess from the title, there are both stories and poems or songs. Uh, Leanne is also a musician, and she is Anishinaabe. She's a scholar and an artist, as well as a writer and musician. Anyway, she's got at least 8 books out, including this one. And uh, her characters are Anishinaabe, and most of them it's contemporary life. So she incorporates colonial history as part of the what's affecting these characters, as well as just day-to-day stuff. But the style, her storytelling style is definitely drawing on Indigenous traditions. So if you're used to reading Western literature, you probably would notice that there's something different about these, either that they're drawing on mythology or seem to be more about teaching wisdom without saying you must do this or you must do that. Ah, it's a particular quality, and but I'm not quite sure how to explain. She does use a lot of humor, and I listened to this in audiobook, and that is read by Tantu Cardinal. So I do recommend the audiobook edition if you have access to it. I think it's in Hoopla
Oh, okay.
library database, Hoopla. Mhm.
I've only read Nupaming by her, and I have a couple other books by her. Pardon?
I said that's so good. Nopaming was one of my top 10 that I
Yeah,
contributed to this list.
yeah. And it did make the top 67, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this book written like that? Like, is that one's written kind of in vignettes and little paragraphs and
This one is more individual stories.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I really like her writing and I like how she kind of approaches her structure and things like that in Nupaming. And I have a couple other books, not this one though, so I'm gonna have to check more of her books out because I think she's someone to keep an eye on for sure. She keeps coming up in lists and I think she's flying under the radar somehow, even with Nupaming, which was popular, or more popular, I guess. But yeah, somehow she keeps flying under the radar. And so I'm like, we need to,
Change that.
yes, we have to change that. I agree. I agree. The next book is Hellgoing by Lynn Coady, published in 2013. The collection has 9 stories. I haven't read this. I have read another book by Lynn Coady, um, which I have to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan. So I'm a little bit hesitant in picking up more of her work. However, short stories might be a way to kind of get in there and see what she's all about. So it's possible that I may pick this up. But these are slice of life stories, very much like an Alice Munro kind of idea. But like kind of these seem to have like kind of a darker side to them, dark comedy, maybe. Yeah, some darkness, which I actually like. I love dark humor. I like when, yeah, I like when we're able to, especially if there's some humor in it, to have, some darkness around that, but then to bring the light in through the humor. So I like that. But yeah, because I didn't care for the novel that I had read, I have been a little bit hesitant in this one.
In 2013, she won the Giller Prize for Hellgoing. And at the time when I read it, I found the stories were not to my taste. However, I have read a couple of novels that she's written that I did like. So it was probably just my mood when I read it because all of the women, as I seem to remember, were not uh, likable characters. They were angry or fierce or, uh, yeah. So maybe if I was in a different kind of mood, I would have said, yes, this is what I need right now.
Okay, that's good to know kind of going into it if I do decide to pick it up. But yeah, that didn't help me put it up higher on my TV already. We will see. And you're right. Sometimes it is like, so sometimes I've picked up a book and been like, no, I'm not really liking this at all. And I've put it aside and then I try it again and I end up loving it. So sometimes it is the time and place and the mood and all of those things too. So you never know. Maybe I would have liked the novel that I read earlier by her at a different time. Yeah,
Mood has so much of an effect, I think, on our reading lives.
I
Mhm.
think so too. I think so too. This next book, I am so excited to read. I want to read it so bad. And it's Madame Victoria by Catherine Leroux. This is translated from the French by Lazer Lederhendler. This was published in 2015, and I love the premise of this collection. And yeah, I cannot wait to read it. It's based on true events, I believe, about a woman whose body is found near a Montreal hospital. And they do everything that they possibly can in order to identify who she is. They do missing persons reports, they do dental records, they do all of these things, and they are never able to identify her and find out who this woman is. So, what Catherine Leroux has done is she's written 12 stories that all kind of imagine different stories for this woman that we don't have an identity for. And I am so interested in how she has done this. So it is very high on my wish list to pick up the book and finally get to it. I'm hoping this year. Yeah.
It does sound pretty intriguing. And Catherine Leroux also has this collection on the list, Party Wall, also translated by Lazer Lederhendler. And so this one is interconnected short stories. And I just finished reading it and I thought it was fantastic. It's really good. And the reason I picked it up is because of this project that we did. So hooray for us.
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
the stories uh, definitely come together with the feel of a novel by the end, but the connections between each at first seem like they are so far apart. Uh, but they're there, but there's surprising connections even within each of the stories. And it's a good example about how truth is stranger than fiction.
Mhm.
So, like in Madame Victoria that you were just talking about, there are true things that Catherine Leroux used as a springboard for these stories, but she doesn't tell you about them until the very end in the notes, and it would be spoilery actually to talk about them. So just know that they're set in the future in Canada and the US. There's a little bit of kind of a fantastical element, sort of once in a while, that kind of reminded me of the playfulness that Heather O'Neill uses
Mhm.
in her writing. And yeah, I do recommend it.
You're, I think, the third or fourth person to talk very highly about this collection, and so it's on my radar as well. I need to check it out.
Love at Last Sight, and it's by Thea Bowering. She was born in Vancouver, but now she lives in Edmonton. So, because I lived in Edmonton for a long time, I was familiar with her as being part of the literary community there. But as so far, this is her only published work, this collection of stories. And once again, as a library staff member, I was part of a group that was narrowing down choices for a Reader's Choice Award long list. And that's how I came to have my hands on a copy of it. And I, I don't have it anymore, but I flagged so many passages that when I had to give the book back, I realized that I didn't want to be parted with it. So I went and bought a new copy to give back to be circulated to the other library staff so that they could also read it and do their voting on narrowing down the long list. Uh, and when I moved to Victoria, I finally decided to take those flags out and not keep it. But for me, those flags, I use them often to mark um, vocabulary or word usage that really strikes me in some way. And so this is a great book for someone who reads for language.
Mhm.
So the stories are, they're good stories too. They're realistic situations, relationships between people mostly. With the language, so many literary allusions, for example. Yeah, just delicious kind of writing.
That
Yeah.
this was a book that I hadn't heard of until this list, and now you've just put that up my TBR, so now I have to read that. So I had no idea what it was about, and I'd never heard of the author or anything like that. So yeah, now I'm excited to read it. The next book is Wenjack by Joseph Boyden, which I do have a little copy here. It's a very tiny book. It's really more of a novella. Like it's a short story in and of itself. So it's not really a collection of short stories. It was published in 2016, and Cheney Wenjack is a real life character that really existed. And it was about how, or his story is that he was taken away from his family to go to residential school hundreds of kilometers away, like 600 kilometers away. And of course, he was not treated well and he tries to escape, but he never returns home. And Cheney Wenjack's life and story has been used a few different times in literature as kind of a way to bring awareness to what people went through in the residential schools and about, yeah, especially the people who never returned home. They're supposed to go to school and then, really it was a nightmare. So yeah, so this is it's a quick little read, but it does give a really good understanding of, the fate that so many young people faced. Yeah,
Yeah, it's very sad.
it is sad.
So next, this is another one that I haven't read. I think there were four on the list that I haven't read, and this is one of them. And it sounds so good. So it's Late Breaking by K.D. Miller. I have read a previous collection of her short stories, and I think this one is her fifth. So that's, definitely a specialty. K.D. Miller is an Ontario author from Hamilton. And what I love about this, and this is also really good for Framed in September, which is the art readathon, because what she's done is based each story on a painting by Alex Colville, who was a Canadian painter. He died in 2016, but quite iconic for his style. He used a fine paintbrush, and so the overall effect is very, very smooth. Uh, if you're familiar with his work, is you see one, right away. That's Alex Colville. And all of the characters in here are, as I understand it, from the same small community, and they're all elderly. So that attracts me as well. I love reading stories about older people.
Mhm.
And there are even paintings. So they're not very big, but there's a picture of each painting that she writes about and then goes on to tell
Wow.
the story.
The paintings look like photographs themselves. They look very realistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a high realism sort of.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, and I believe there's a little bit of fantastical element in here as well because apparently there's a ghost that haunts most of the stories. So yeah,
Excellent.
I'm definitely going to read this one.
That's another one that's going on my list, Lindy. Because again, I hadn't heard it. And I love when books, which is one of the reasons that I love that you're doing Framed in September and that you're going to that I love that. Well, I'll leave links to your introductory video to that so that people can check that out if they haven't already. But I love books that talk about art or have something to do with art and incorporate that. So yes, I'm very excited about this. And I've already participated, but people don't know that yet. So, but I will be putting a video out on how I'm doing that. So, yeah, and that book sounds really, really good. Yeah. Oh, this next book. It is it is probably one of my favorite short story collections of all time. And it is How to Pronounce Knife by Suvankam Themavongsa. Right? Right? This
So
is so good. It's so good. Um, I think the writing is excellent. I think the stories are excellent. I think like so many of these stories have stayed with me. I continue to think about them. And the stories really kind of focus on, people trying to be part of another culture, have to deal with different languages. Somehow they're trying to, um, yeah, sometimes they have their foot in both, in both cultures. It's just, it's so good. I adore this collection. Like, I can't really gush enough about it. And I think, like, Sivankam Themavongsa, her writing is unlike anyone else as well. She's a poet, and it really shows in the way she chooses to use language in her stories. And I just love it. I love it. I think more people need to read this. When this won the Giller a number of years ago, and when it won, I did do a bit of a dance. I was so excited.
I was participating in a Shadow Giller project, and our jury was unanimous in this one being the winning book.
Yeah. And I was surprised because it's very rare for me. I like short story collections because I like to learn about the author and their kind of their style of writing and things like that. So I enjoy short story collections and I like, when I find a really good short story and to me they're few and far between, but I loved almost every single one of these. And I thought, am I really choosing a short story collection to win this prize? And yes, I was, and yes, it did, and I was so thrilled. So, yeah,
Yeah.
this is an excellent one. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I did, for the purposes of this conversation that we're having, I did look back to see how frequently short stories have
Oh,
won major prizes in Canada in the 21st century. And four have won the Giller in the past 23 years. And five have won the Governor General's Award for literature in the past.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, and because really short stories is really a Canadian thing, right? I think you and I have talked about this before.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, I know that short stories, it's not just a Canadian thing, but I think that Canadians have really embraced the short story, kind of structure. And I know in high school, you're constantly having to read short stories and things like that in the English classes. So yeah, like I think I think it's unique to Canada in how we, I don't know, read short stories. I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like it is. So
Yeah. We have such good short story writers, I guess. I
we
don't
do.
know.
Yeah.
So this next one, it's called This Place, 150 Years Retold. And the editor is Kateri Akawenzidam, who is Anishinaabe. She's from uh, two First Nations, Chippewa of Nawash First Nation and Sagin Ojibwe Nation. She edits it and has one story in here. And Alicia Elliott wrote the introduction. And then there are lots of other luminaries who have written stories that they're paired up with different artists. So
Oh,
it's all in graphic novel format. So including Catherine Vermette,
love her.
and she has the first
Oh,
story in here set back in the 1800s. And then the stories progress through time towards present day. And they are based on true historical figures and historical events. So this one is kind of in between nonfiction and fiction. And the 150 years foretold, so this is referring to years since Confederation of Canada. And uh, if you weren't in Canada, then you might not have had the feel for the, what did they call it? The sesquicentennial or something like that, the
yeah.
150th anniversary of Confederation, anyway. But around, my circle of acquaintances and friends, anyway, didn't really feel like celebrating that 150 years because of um, awareness of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was about residential school system, and that happened in 2015. Uh, when was the 150th? 2016 or 2017, somewhere in there. Must have been 2017 because 2017 because 1867 was Confederation. And then even more recently than that, a few years later, all of the news that's come out about unmarked graves of children at residential schools, hundreds, we're talking hundreds. So, it didn't feel like we had a lot to celebrate or to be proud of. And books like this are helping to correct the history that we never learned at school. And it's so well done. I really highly recommend this collection. It's excellent. Yeah.
Thank you for putting that on my radar too, Wendy, because I'm glad that you actually have this one to talk about because I had no idea. Um, but yeah, I like the whole concept of it. I like that they did that. And they obviously chose some really good people too to be included in the
Yeah, David A. Robertson is in here and Chelsea Bowell.
Hmm,
Yeah, can't think of who else. It's going to be listed somewhere on here, but yeah, lots of great writers and
excellent.
important stories that are they're fun to read. It's not like, oh no, another sad story. They're really well told. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. This next book was published in 2020, and it's David Bergen, Hear the Dark. So this is a collection of short stories, and then at the end there's a novella. And this was the first book, well, so far, and the only book that I've read by David Bergen. Um, and the stories take place in a few different places around the world, like Canada for sure, but then also in Honduras and in, I think
Yeah.
it's Vietnam. Vietnam, yeah. Um, and they have themes of light and dark, maybe good and evil. Um, okay, so I'm gonna be really honest. I can't tell you, I don't remember any of these stories. So I read it. I mean, and I remember there being like a big thing about don't have a novella and with short stories, and people were upset. Like I remember that. I didn't care about that so much. I don't care as long as the writing's good. If I had to choose any of them, I think I remember that I liked the novella better than the short stories, which is why I'm really interested in reading more of his things. I think maybe if I read some of his novels, I might get along with it better. But this, yeah, this wasn't my favorite. Lindy, have you read it and you really liked it or something? Because
I read it.
okay,
I could not understand what prize jurists were seeing in it. It's like,
yeah,
wow, I'm never reading another book by David Bergen. But this is an example. I did think that the novella was the best of the bunch,
yeah, I think so too.
but I found his writing quite um, anti-women. And maybe it was just my attitude as I was reading it, but no, it's just not for me. No.
I agree. Yeah.
Now, one that is for me is this next book, Animal Person by Alexander MacLeod. Uh, I did own a copy because I pre-ordered it. I was so excited that there was a new short story collection by Alexander MacLeod. Now, to give you some background on the author, he's the son of Alistair MacLeod, who's also he was an excellent Canadian author, especially famous for his short stories, and coming from Nova Scotia. So uh, his son Alexander was born in Nova Scotia, but grew up in Windsor, Ontario. And his first collection of short stories, Light Lifting, got all kinds of critical recognition, including for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. So anyway, this one is also really good, and I could not believe that it didn't win anything. What people were missing out on this great collection. Uh, there was one story in here that won an award separately. It's called Lagomorphs, and it's about a pet rabbit. Uh, the thing I'm trying to describe what it is that I like so much about his writing. Uh, the the situations are always very interesting, thought provoking. Uh, his style is very crisp, no extra words, and you really get the feel for the situation, whether it's a fellow he's the only one in the city who's available to help some elderly relatives. So he's the one who goes to help them when they need to move a chandelier but his interaction with these old people, or another case was the whole family traveling for a funeral, kind of in convoy, traveling from Ontario to Nova Scotia to be there for a funeral, and then the circumstances, what happened around the death.
Mm.
You could just see these people, and when there's a death in the family, it really brings up the big emotions, right? And those are all there. Animal Person. Oh. Out of all of these, I don't know, maybe this is the number one book to read.
Okay. This one is on my list because of you. Because when you read it and you did a review on it on your channel, I wrote it down right away. I was like, I need to read this. Lindy said so. I'm doing it. But you spoke very passionately about it. Well, you're speaking passionately about it now, but you spoke very passionately about it when you first read it. And I thought, oh. And then I was also surprised because of the way you talked about it, that it didn't make it into like the short lists and into the like I was surprised it didn't go further than it did. And it's kind of another one that's been under the radar. And I'm grateful to you for putting it on my radar. So
Yeah. And even though it's been like, when did this come out? 2022. So it's been 2 years,
yeah,
and I haven't reread it, but these stories are still, living on in my mind. So that's
I
that's
love
an
that.
yeah.
I love that. Yeah. This next book is also from 2022. And it's also a book that's the stories are in my mind. I think about them, a few of them anyway, often. Um, and I don't know, it's probably not a book that somebody would think, oh, that's a Jolene book because it has sci-fi and fantasy. And that is not normally my go-to genres. But I adored this book, and it's Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu. I loved this book, and I think it's because the stories were very clever. They were very unique. Um, yeah, they were so good. Like I think about some of the stories, and a couple that I think about all the time are the one where the husband kills the wife and he's waiting for her to be reprinted, and it's going to take 24 hours. So he's figuring out what he's going to do within that 24 hours. He doesn't have to worry about her. And meanwhile, this happens all the time. He's killed her many times. She's killed him many times, and they just keep reprinting each other. So it's a really interesting, like, and just the way it's written, you're like, it sounds so absurd, and yet the way she writes it, it feels like it can happen. It's like so interesting. And there's another one. I love the theme of love is maybe not the right word, but I like reading about grief, the theme of grief in stories, and finding out how authors will kind of take that topic. And there's a short story in here where they can kind of go into like a virtual reality and talk to their loved ones. And I liked the concept of it and how she brings some of the themes around grieving into it. It was really, really well done. So I think about that one often as well. It's such a good book. And I have other books by Kim Fu and I need to read them.
The girl who has wings growing out of her
Yeah.
ankles. And
Right?
yeah, the person whose house is that she's house sitting is infested with insects.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everyone else is like, yeah, so what's the big deal?
Yes. Yeah. I just think it's so clever and inventive. And I had never really read short stories like that before. And then I got a chance to see her read from the collection as well. And that just made me love it even more. Like I'd already read it and I already loved it, but that made me love it even more hearing her read the story. So yeah, this is a really good one as well.
That's one that I've read twice,
Yeah.
and my appreciation grew on the second reading. Yeah.
Okay, I'm taking note. I will do a reread.
Coexistence by Billy Ray Belcourt. He is Nahiawak from Driftpile Cree Nation in northern Alberta, and he's both a writer and an academic. He's published award-winning poetry collections as well as essays and a novel. And this collection of interconnected short stories, well, at least two stories are kind of paired within the collection. And so I guess that's part of the coexistence title. So sometimes you might see uh, a gay couple where it's from one person's point of view, and then the next story it's sometime later and it's from the other person's point of view. There's another pair of stories that are about a mother and her son. And he has queer characters. He's gay himself, and he has indigenous characters in his stories. And uh, his, he's got a really high quality of writing. So if you're interested, especially in literary fiction, this is definitely a book for you. And yet he also gets into the heart of things. It's not really intellectual. The feelings are there.
I really like Billy Ray Belcourt's writing, and there's a couple of books, this one included, that I haven't read yet, but all of the books that I have read by him, I have really enjoyed.
Well, this
So,
is brand new in 2024.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a couple more books. Chrysalis by Anuja Varghese was published in 2023. Every time I hear someone talk about this book, I think I really need to read this book because everyone has spoken so highly about it. Um, so these stories are about women, all women of color, and they are about topics that I love. So community, family, and they explore queerness as well. And yeah, I cannot wait to read this. It's a debut short story collection. I think the author writes other things, like she does some erotica and things like that, probably books that I wouldn't pick up, but I'm really interested in this one as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that if I read it, she'll be a Canadian author that I will continue to follow. But you have read this, Lindy, so you may have more to say about the stories and the writing.
Yeah, and this is another one that I've read twice because I listened to the audio and I read it in print as well. There's just so much going on in these stories. Um, and since you like lesser known monsters, I
Hmm.
think you would like the surprising uh, quality
Oh,
that happens within the stories. Like someone who is praying to a Hindu goddess for, a certain thing to happen, and then, you know, what what happens.
okay. I do like when a short story is able to surprise me, when it has kind of either that twist or that, nuance that you're not expecting at all. I love that about short stories. So now I
Yeah.
want to read this more.
She's a South Asian author in Ontario, and I also like that focus. So, as I mentioned, there's Hindu mythology in it, and I think this one did this one win, or it was on the long list maybe for the Carol Shields Prize. Have I
Oh
got?
yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
possibly recognized also on a short list for the Gigi.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
it's it's definitely been out there because every time I see it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I really need to read this book.
yeah,
So,
I think you'll find it quite fun.
okay, okay.
Notes Towards Recovery, which is by Louise Ells, and that came out in 2019. It's one that I have not read. She is from Northern Ontario, North Bay, and this book was published by Latitude 46,
Hmm.
which is a publisher that focuses on Northern Ontario voices. And it's described as thoughtful short stories that explore loss and the spaces around loss. She has stories about illness and coming to the end of life and caregivers. Empathy and compassion are things that are mentioned by people who have reviewed it. So that sounds good to me. And I did see when I was looking into more information about her, she has a new a novel. So her next book after this one just came out on September 1st, and it's called Lies I Told My Sister.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. She is entirely new to me. I'd never heard of her or either of these books before.
New to me as well, so somebody that I can look into. And I love finding out new authors. So yeah, so these are the 21 short story collections that people submitted to the best CanLit books of the 21st century. Thank you so much, first of all, to everyone who submitted books, and especially people who remembered the short stories, because I think sometimes we don't think of those when we're thinking of our top books and all of those kind of things. And here we have 21 collections that people can check out if you haven't already read them. Thank you again, Lindy, for doing this project with me.
My pleasure. I love talking about these books.
Me too. And I love your love for CanLit and books in general. So I always learn something when you and I are together, and I really appreciate that. To everyone else, we look forward to chatting with you in the comments, and please let us know. Have you read any of these short story collections? Are you interested in any of them? Are there some short story collections that if we had a top short story collection, vote out there, what book would you put on the list? I always love hearing all about that. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.
Bye, everybody.